I'll be honest, I was going to talk about something completely different this week, but changed topics at the very last minute. So if my thoughts sound a little bit more haphazard than usual, that's why. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. And we're going to talk about something rather personal to me today. You see, in the furry fandom, there are a lot of social norms that are specifically tied to this fandom. Most of them are actually in how we speak, as there are a lot of words and phrases that we say in this fandom that take on a different or special meaning in the context of the furry fandom specifically. Actually, one of my favorite examples of this is ma. Like, where else, other than deeply thorough academic papers, do you see the word ma just thrown around in general conversation? But these norms aren't specific to just how we speak. They also encompass how we greet each other as well. Now, this shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone who's been in the fandom for a while, but it is very common and almost expected to be open to hugging other furries in this fandom, especially as a salutation. Now, for a lot of furries, this was a very welcome surprise, and they became very comfortable with the idea of hugging everyone quickly and rather seamlessly. But there is a certain number of people in this fandom where this openness to hug everyone caught them off guard, even to the point of uncomfortability. And I know this because I am one of those people in the latter category. In fact, in many ways, the furry fandom actually taught me that it's not just okay to hug people, but how to hug people in the first place. Which I know may sound kind of weird, like how do you not know how to hug someone? But you'd be surprised to hear that any positive physical interaction with another person isn't the norm for many people, including people in this fandom. And that's basically what I wanted to go through today. I just wanted to sit down here and talk to you about how furries taught me how to hug. And okay, sure, that may sound like a pretty loaded statement, but it is true, at least in my specific experience. In fact, if we expand this idea, what the furry fandom actually taught me was that giving and receiving hugs is not just a pretty normal thing to do, but a gesture that is considered positive and supportive. And as I learned that, I in turn also learned how to give and receive hugs myself. Let's take a look at both of those ideas, starting with the former. One thing that's really interesting about this community in particular is that in its in-person form, the furry fandom is actually a very physical community, which makes sense to some extent. A majority of the fandom meets and interacts with each other online, so when they get a chance to meet in person, the natural human draw to being close to other humans really kicks into high gear. And that is only compounded when you add fursuits into the mix, as part of their draw is how soft and cuddly they feel. Now, like I said, for a lot of people, the physicality of this fandom is pretty easy to adjust to. In fact, it's sometimes taken a little too far. But for others, like myself, this came as a surprise, and it wasn't one of those fun surprises either. In fact, for me, this heightened level of physical interaction actually scared me off from interacting with other furries in the fandom in person for a pretty long time. We won't go into all the dirty details, but for me, I grew up in an environment where physically touching other people wasn't really a thing, especially in a positive sense. In fact, the only times that I came in contact with another person that wasn't an accident when growing up was during playing sports or if I got in trouble, and I think both of those are pretty self-explanatory. And in any other situation, touching another person was strictly off limits. I was actually encouraged to give people their space. Now, of course, there were small carve-outs for exceptions like greeting new people, where I was taught to give a firm but brief handshake and leave it at that. And if there was something to celebrate, a high five or a fist bump would be the extent of expressing a shared positive experience. And because that's how I grew up, this became the foundation of what I was comfortable with in terms of interacting with other people. And not for nothing, I never had these notions challenged throughout basically my entire life. So I'm sure you could guess how much of a shock it was when I went to my first furry convention and saw everyone hugging each other constantly. And yeah, it really did shock and confuse me. Like, I knew hugging was a thing that other people did, but I thought it was at most saved for super special occasions, not just to say hi to someone. And this all came to a head when someone approached me for the first time at a con and went in for a hug. Now remember, from my view and my perspective, hugging was not normal for me, especially from someone I've never met before. So like any person exposed to something that they were never taught was okay, I panicked and backed away. Now in hindsight, I feel really bad for what I did, as that recoil went through none of my social filters, and I'm sure that the way that I stepped back was dramatic and met with a pretty disgusted look. Like, if I were a cat in real life, there would be no doubt that I would have hissed at them. And of course, I apologized and explained that I wasn't really into hugs, and to their credit, they were very polite and apologetic for assuming, but I still remember that day and that interaction specifically as my welcome to the furry fandom moment, and it made me rethink a couple of things. It's really hard to convey, but you gotta understand, that was a moment of fear for me. Those were fight or flight instincts kicking in for someone coming in and giving me a hug. That's how unfamiliar I was with the whole concept, and after that con and in the following couple of weeks, I seriously reconsidered the whole idea of me continuing to be a furry. I don't want to call it outright traumatizing. I think that word gets thrown around too loosely when referring to things that make us uncomfortable, but honestly, it was pretty close. So after that, in the next couple of months, I had a pretty interesting decision to make. I really didn't want to give up being a furry, even though I did consider that for a long time. I just hate the idea of being a quitter. But going forward, I had to reevaluate this whole hugging thing. Would I continue to be someone that didn't want to do hugs, or did I want to somehow eventually let this type of human interaction into my life as well? Now, before going forward, I do want to stop here and stress that either of those decisions were going to be perfectly valid. Like, I don't want people to get the wrong idea that the moral of this story is to be okay with hugging. If you don't want to be hugged or give hugs yourself in this fandom, that is perfectly acceptable, and you don't need to justify why if you don't want to. But for me, and I'm sure you saw this coming, I decided to try and have an open mind and give this whole hugging thing a shot. And this is what I mean by the furry fandom also teaching me how to give a hug. Up until this point, I only had a conceptual idea of what a hug actually was. So I treated learning how to give hugs like learning how to do any other skill. I started by researching the benefits of giving hugs, of which there are a lot. They can help reduce stress, boost your immune system, lower your heart rate, and a bunch of other things to your body that basically helps calm you down. And after learning that, I literally sat down and watched a bunch of tutorials here on YouTube on how to give hugs. And please feel free to laugh. On its face, it is a pretty funny premise. But it's true, I took notes on those videos and even got a few practice reps with the air and some stuffed animals that I have. But like any skill, you can watch all the film you want, but you don't get better at it without actually going out and practicing in the field. So throughout the next few conventions and meetups, I practiced giving and receiving hugs. At first, it was really awkward, and in the beginning, I wasn't really a good hugger. They were very quick, like once I felt the physical contact with another person, that was it. And receiving hugs at the beginning was even worse. It was very hard to keep my mind at ease and my heart from racing as I got used to someone being in that close proximity to me for that extended period of time. But as I got more and more reps in, it slowly became something that I got used to, and as of today, I would say that I'm a lot more comfortable with hugs as a whole in this fandom than when I first joined. Which, I don't know, that's pretty neat, at least to me. You all in this fandom encouraged me to learn a new skill, how to give hugs. Now, before we start celebrating too hard, let me say that this is still a very new and recent development, and the comfort level of hugs is still not 100%. Honestly, at this point in time, I'm still only fully comfortable with hugging good friends that I've made in this fandom over time. So if you meet me in person at a con and I've never met you before, you might not get a hug out of me when we first meet. If we have a good conversation, I might give you a quick one as we're leaving, but honestly, nothing more than that. But like I said earlier, like any skill, you don't just become comfortable with it overnight. And if I'm completely honest, this is probably going to be a lifelong journey for me. The next big step for me is being comfortable giving hugs to people outside of the furry fandom. But I will say this, after being in this fandom for a little under half a decade now, I get it. I get why we as a community love hugs so much. The research is true. They do provide a tremendous sense of comfort and support, and just a sense that the other person cares about your existence enough to literally invite your physical presence into theirs, a concept that I was never even presented with until I first joined the fandom. And again, I do want to make clear that just because it is so universal in the fandom, it is not a requirement. And if you don't want to be hugged or touched for any reason, you should not feel guilty or bad about it. As someone who is still working on my personal comfort with it, I deny hugs all the time. Thankfully, most people in this fandom are understanding and won't take offense to it, so don't be afraid to speak up. But I will say this, after being completely unfamiliar and averse to it growing up, I'm a big fan of the precedence that hugging has in this fandom. It's not for everyone, but for those who are okay with it, it's one of the best ways to tangibly communicate to other members of this fandom that you matter, and I'm glad that I have you in my life. Alright, that's it. Thanks for hanging out with me through this very rambly episode. We'll be back with the normal stuff very soon. In fact, next month should be a pretty fun one for this channel in particular. But for now, thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next one, but until then, stay wild out there. Peace.